And then I was like, or maybe if I want one, I'm sure this problem exists for everyone because, if I need it, others do. So 3 days later, I went to China to explore everything.
3 days later? Whoa.
And then 3 months later, launched in America and Australia.
Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. I am your host, Richard Thompson. Today, we have on the show Olivia Carr. Olivia is the founder of Silk pillowcases, a multi-million-dollar business, but her life hasn't been all wins and successes. In this episode, we dig deep in her life, the trauma that she's experienced, raising 2 kids on her own, getting into $100,000 of debt, paying that off, creating a huge company, the Kardashians and how they changed the brand, all of it. This has been my favorite episode so far on the pod, and I hope you really enjoy it. So let's get into it. Olivia Carr, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
I'm very excited. Thank you for having me.
I guess from the top, for those who don't know you, how would you best describe yourself?
That's a great question. For those that don't know me, I would like to be, well, once you do get to know me, I would like to be described as a very kind, generous, open, real, relatable individual.
Outside of who you are, how would you describe what you do?
What I do is, something I have is a business. It's not necessarily what I do. I think what I try and do really well is spread impact, inspire others, be brave. Like, bravery is a huge piece in my life, especially the older I get. I think it's something that I try and push myself to be more of. I think we're all really brave when we're young and we lose that. And so I guess what I do is I try and be brave every day.
They're really good answers. Angela Duckworth, who authored Grit, talks about, she very much summarizes the idea of grit, and obviously in her book. And from what I understand about your life, and we'll definitely get into it, that's a common trait of yours.
Yeah, it is. And then I think on the flip side to that, another common trait that others might perceive is a bit of chaos. Like, I've been asked obviously I have grit and determination, but sometimes people will ask me the question, do I have those things? Because I also have a lot of chaos in my life. There's always something happening. I'm unsure about that. I think the grit and determination comes from always believing that there's more to achieve, and not that it's about achieving as such, but it's about, I guess, pushing my own limits or seeing where my limits are, which sometimes can be scary as well, because sometimes you can kind of get to a place where you're like, oh, that's interesting, I've never been there before. And then that can feel really scary, and then I find myself pulling back. But then the flip side to that, around the chaos side or the busyness, I have a psychologist, and one of the things that he says to me is I seem to have more going on in my life in a week than most people do in 3 months. And not that there's ever anything wrong with that. He's never trying to correct that or anything. It's just an awareness that I live a really full life, and others can sometimes perceive that as kind of it's a lot, like there's a lot going on. But for me, I can't imagine, I call it a big life. I can't imagine having a life where I'm standing still, because then I'm not growing. And I just have this inner drive to constantly grow. I could probably learn to slow down a little, but I don't know, I thrive on that feeling of pushing, growing, experiencing, I guess, almost the impossible, or what others would perceive as someone at work said to me the other day, this is deep, but they, with everything, we've got a lot going on at work at the moment. And someone said, most people would have jumped off a cliff by now, but you just never give up. And so for me, it's just not an option. My mind doesn't go there.
In that book, Angela Duckworth says that grit is living life like a marathon, not a sprint. And it's enduring when others give up. And that's, I think, I know you made mention of my athletics and that endurance part, but there's a common trait here between the two of us, that we're both endurance people, and where enthusiasm is common amongst people, endurance is rare. When it gets challenging, when you hit those hurdles of life, of business, of whatever the situation is, and that, to your point of what the person at work said, where others would jump off a cliff and go tap out and go, I'm done, this is too much. It's the rare people that go, this is why I'm here, is to endure this. And that's the definition of endurance, right? Is to endure the difficulties, because you're essentially sacrificing now for a better outcome in the future.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think for me, in my experience, the more I push myself, or the more I take on, or the bigger the challenge, or even the book. Like, I'm not an author. When someone said, do you want to write a book? And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Like, a new skill. I think I've got some great things to put out in the world. I really underestimated how hard it is to write a book, first and foremost. It is I've raised 2 children, and it is way harder than that. And I think that's because, well, one, I want to put out, not that I ever strive for perfection, but I do strive for excellence. I could have got a ghostwriter. I could have tapped out, halfway through thinking this is so hard, I need help. But for me, I'm like, no, I'm so determined to, it's hard because I haven't done it. So therefore, in order to grow, I need to push through the hard. I need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And that was challenging. There were moments where I was on the ground in the fetal position. I shared a lot on my social media because I think people need to see, you see a book at the end, but I want people to see the journey, because it was never about the book. It was well, what am I going to learn? And the number one person who's going to get the most out of that book for the history of that book is me. This was really just an experience to, one, see how much I could tolerate in terms of all of my life lessons and wounds and all the things coming to the surface, and then how I was going to deal with it, how I was going to approach it, how I was going to embrace it. And it was really tough. And I think, a lot of people probably, the reason why some people write books and others don't is because that's another example. It's just too hard. It is hard. But I think I do, I don't call it chaos. I think I like hard. I'm not scared of hard, maybe. It's not that I like hard. I'm not scared of hard. And that's maybe the difference between me and someone else.
I think that there's any element of success or reward, the challenge is a necessary component. You can't feel accomplished or have achieved something without it being of some level of discomfort or sacrifice.
Yeah, which is what I mean when I was researching you. One, I was in awe because I just think anyone that does something to a particular level, one that's super inspiring, hugely motivating. You don't even need to be into, athletics to admire what you're doing. But I guess I sat back and I looked at it and I was like, wow, first and foremost, you must have such a great mindset. Mental toughness is really what I saw. It wasn't about the running. It wasn't about how long it takes, the kilometres, all the things that would be hard. I think it's like running a business. It's like life, parenting, all the things. It all comes back to how mentally, the training that you must have to do on your mind outside of the physical. And I was like, that is so inspiring.
Thank you. And I agree that it's majority mental, right? And I think it's transferable. And I think this is the reason why we started the pod, is that it's that mindset piece, that endurance piece is transferable to all facets of life. Anyone can write a page. Yeah. But can you make a chapter? Can you make multiple chapters? Can you make it all an amazing story and publish it and distribute it? And now you're on a book tour, right? And so most people say no, they can write a page, but it's the endurance. It's the mindset to be able to endure.
And I think what's maybe not talked about near enough, mainstream, is the number one question people will say to me is, oh, how do you start a business? Or how did you grow your business? Or how can I start a business? And my answer to that is probably not what people want to hear. Anyone can follow 6 steps, how to do ABC, go on TikTok and how to bake a cake or whatever. A cake's probably not a good example because it's quite easy. It's a basic thing to do. But when it comes to anything challenging, my response to that is I could say to you, and I do in actually one of the chapters, here's all the practical tips that you need to start a business. But I think the difference between starting and succeeding, it actually all comes back to mindset. And it's like, and I make it really clear in the book that this is how hard it is. Because if you're not prepared or at a place in life where you, one, have the time and the energy to want to invest in what I call, I guess, mindset training, you're probably not going to succeed. And I think mindset is one of those things that not enough people wake up consciously in the morning and think, I go to the gym, I train. They don't actually consciously think about training your mind, whereas I do. I literally, do all the things to try and get my mind as strong as that's why I do therapy, right? Therapy to me is kind of like having a personal trainer for your body,
mind, yeah.
Right? It's the same thing. It's just I think more people need to realise the potential of their own mind is actually what will help them achieve or get out of situations, not even about achieving. Like if you really want to turn your current situation around, start with your mind.
I feel like we get to certain crossroads in life, and particularly traumatic events, where you're on the floor, and that is the catalyst to make that decision of, right, I've got to invest in my own mindset here, in trying to get myself out of this situation or off the canvas. Do you think people need to get to that place to make their own self-realization, or do you think, and then certainly the book is incredible to help someone avoid that situation?
Yeah. I mean, ideally not would probably be my first response to that, only because I know that once you get to that place, if you're not in a position where you can seek help, or you maybe are uncomfortable seeking help, that can be a really dark place to stay and scary. So I wouldn't want that for anyone I'm very open to seeking help. I'm aware of when I need external support, whether it's friends, family, psychologists, whatever it is. So I would say no, you don't always have to get to that depth of, I call it like the basement of my, if I'm a high-rise building. I think it's important to get to the basement every now and then, because you actually do need to see, what's down there? What are some things that have been hidden there for years?
The foundations. Yeah.
But I do that because I have a rock-solid support system around me that if I find something that I've forgotten was in the basement and I need help clearing it out, I have that support. So I would say that, it's important to have support before you maybe get to that level of work.
That's a good answer.
But I do think it's important to get to that level at some point in your life.
Failure is always inevitable, and so it's only relative to what you've only experienced. Someone's trauma is not comparable to yours, but we'll all get there. To be honest, I think that if you don't have significant losses or different failures in life, then you're probably leading a pretty mediocre life.
Yeah, life would be boring. I would find it
Well, you're certainly
boring.
not.
Yeah.
You're not risking much, and you need the risk.
Yeah.
So let's go back and take me back to teenage years on the Gold Coast.
Ugh.
Don't just say that. Come on.
No offense to anyone living on the Gold Coast, but that is actually the physiological response that I still get in my body, and I should probably clarify that, because that probably sounds a little harsh. So one thing I've actually never shared, I touch on the book about experiencing some trauma. I've actually never shared it on a podcast. The reason that I think that I still do that is because one thing that's still in the basement is some abuse that I went through on the Gold Coast that I only just started dealing with in about April last year, when I was 1 month out from finishing the book. And it came up because of the book, because I'd suppressed a lot of stuff that happened to me on the Gold Coast. I'd suppressed it so much, and then I write this book and I'm like, oh my God, why is all this stuff coming up? It has nothing to do with building a business, but of course it has everything to do with who I am and how I got here. So that's why I still have that response, because the Gold Coast to me, unfortunately as a city now, represents some stuff in the basement that I'm still cleaning out, which is...
Were you born there?
No. So I was born in Cambridge. My dad's Scottish, so that's a really big part of my makeup, is that he was born in the 40s in a really kind of tough childhood. He was the eldest of 5, and he lived a really hard, tough life. And I think that, a lot of the way you're parented back in those days is how you're probably going to parent your kids. Luckily, I feel like I've broken that kind of generational...
You're the circuit breaker.
Yeah. It needed to happen. But I'm kind of thankful, because it's probably what's given me so much strength in life, is I've learnt so much from being raised the way that I was. We then moved to Melbourne when I was 5 or 6. And then I was a really kind of terrible teen. Like I was every parent's worst nightmare from about the age of 12 to, I fell pregnant at 19. I think that was probably a sliding door moment for me. But I was a really terrible child. I grew up in a domestic violence household. There was no love in the house. I didn't have like...
Your father being the perpetrator?
Yeah. So Dad was an alcoholic. Mum obviously copped a lot more than just the physical abuse. My sister's 3 years older than me. I copped the verbal. They both copped physical and verbal. And it's one of those interesting dynamics where from a really young age I sided unknowingly. I mean, I was so young, but I look back now and I sided with my dad. Not that I don't mean sided as in agreed with him, but I think I hid behind him. So I kind of, if there was a war going on at home, if we call it that, I always went on that side of the fence because I thought that was the safety. If you're on that side, you avoid what I was seeing was happening on the other side. Whereas my sister, maybe being a little bit older, was definitely more on the protector side, protecting mum. Obviously, my mum works for me. I adore my mum. And as an adult now, I look back and I'm like, wow, that's just fascinating. But it's the whole fight, flight, freeze. I obviously chose that as a safety mechanism.
As a child, did you ever reflect and think that this isn't a safe place?
I mean, I knew it was wrong. Like I remember the nights where Mum would put us in the car in the middle of the night and take us to our grandparents. And, I think from about the age of 8 or 9, I knew something's... I mean, I probably knew a lot younger than that. I just didn't understand it. But even still, I think even when I was like 14, 15, I never quite jumped back on the other side of the fence because it was still happening at home. And the older I got, I mean, I was in the firing line a lot more because by this stage I was, jumping out windows at night, pretending I was staying at friends' house and really I was at parties. I drank alcohol from the age of 13. I think was the first time I really vomited from half a bottle of vodka, which is just, I mean, my kids now are 17 and 23 and I look at that. My son never wants to drink alcohol and my daughter rarely drinks and is just about to start her career at Deloitte's, the first one to finish uni. Like they are just, I guess, I don't like using the word normal, but they're quite normal children, whereas I was just, I think, rebelling or escaping. I wanted to be anywhere but home, and that put me in some pretty terrible situations, hanging out at parties and getting involved in recreational drugs. And the one thing that I did have, the one foundation I had was I really enjoyed acting from like a really young age. And then I started studying professionally at 9.
Is that also a way to escape, do you think?
I put on so many shows. I think I just wanted to bring joy. Like
Sure.
That's something that I still, like even now when I go and speak to people, I love to put a smile on someone's face. And I think I recognise from a young age, if I can get up and be silly and make the family laugh, like they were the only moments of joy I remember as a kid was when I was entertaining. So yeah, I've actually never thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. And then I left school at 16, so about May of year 11, I dropped out, and the newspapers love to say like high school dropout. I dropped out to go on and study acting. And then I moved to the Gold Coast to study at the Australian Film and Television Academy. I was still, I guess, at that stage in my life, 16, 17, I was still very much, I would say, lost, trying to find my way and living on the Gold Coast without parents, with
what was the situation
complete freedom. I lived in a little one-bedder, like
by yourself?
Yeah, in Burleigh, with a boyfriend actually at the time from high school. We drove up together. And it was just too much freedom for a young person. And particularly with my upbringing, I think it was a lot of freedom. So I think I reference in the book, it was like schoolies, but 365 days of the year for me. I acted, I had a couple of bar jobs. I really had, looking back, I had no direction. But at the time I wasn't aware of that. And then I actually, through the acting thing, ended up getting thrown into some beauty pageant on the Gold Coast, and I won Miss Gold Coast 2000, which was actually probably the first turning point in my life. It had nothing to do with that pageant, but they send you on these like nightclub tours as part of it's like so cringy. You wear your sash and you go off and drink, and promotional tour, I guess.
Sure.
But it was at one of those tours that my my now daughter's dad approached me after I'd had way too many shots of whatever, and that was the night I conceived my daughter. So then I raised her alone, and yeah, there's a whole lot around that. But I always say she found me. Like that moment, that night.
Your daughter found you.
Yeah, like everything led to, I think that was an opportunity for me to, one, actually start my life, like actually stop and I guess seriously consider, well, what am I doing? I know I was young, but like where am I headed? And I don't think I was headed down a good path. And so the day I found out I was pregnant, it was the same week I got my acceptance letter into NIDA.
Which is like Australia, the country's highest level.
And it's all I ever thought I wanted, and yet I had this inner knowing, aside from obviously I was actually devastated to find out I was pregnant. I was in shock, I was in denial, but I had this like inner knowing that there was just no question. I knew I was going to have that baby, and I knew what I was sacrificing, and I knew it would be hard. And that's what I mean. I always choose the hard door.
Yeah. From what I've understood of your life, even from now and as we go further into this story, and as you presented now, is like you bring on the difficulty, you bring on the hard, right? And then
that's maybe what I mean by the chaos.
Yeah,
people
for sure.
Like you really seem to like.
You gravitate to the difficult.
Hard. Yeah.
That's such a trait. In my mind, coming into today, I can understand that you've arrived at that place because of your experiences, right? You're forced to see that there's value, or you're forced to have followed the hard. I want to go to that 19-year-old, or that when you have no direction,
no money, like no stability,
no,
whatsoever.
yeah, exactly,
like
right.
Nothing.
And to be honest, other than the courage, I guess, to leave school and come to the Gold Coast to follow your acting. No purpose of where you're headed. Why do you think you're able to, at the very first moment of choosing hard, went there and said, because it could have been easily, you could have not had the child.
Yeah, which to be fair, like that's a totally different conversation, but I think a lot of people just I had family tell me if I went down that path, my life was over. And that's hard to still think about today because I'm like, well, my life is so much better because of that decision.
Because of that experience, yeah.
I know it sounds like really like woo-woo and like, I don't know, hard for others that maybe aren't connected deeply to their inner self or their inner knowing, which I wasn't aware I had at the time, but I think it was in me. I just knew, like it made no sense. On paper, it made no sense to choose to have that child, especially when, I wasn't in a steady relationship, or there wasn't even that to fall back on. But I just knew in my core that this was, like I say, it's a sliding door moment. It was more than that. It was like, this is kind of the start of my purpose. I am supposed to have this child. I don't know why.
Didn't know where it was going.
Didn't know. I honestly didn't know how hard it was going to be. That's the other thing. I'd never had a child before. I could never have anticipated how hard that was going to be. But same with starting a business.
Yeah.
I had no idea. Like you see everything on Instagram and it makes life seem really cruisy. I struggle even today to articulate it other than this kid found me. Like, I don't know. And we're so connected. Like,
but the courage piece to follow that decision in any
because no one supported my decision at that time, not even the dad. Yeah.
Parent? Yeah, but it took a while to...
I didn't tell my parents straight away.
For a while.
Yeah.
You called them.
Yeah, so it's not like I had like a group of cheerleaders saying, we've got you, like you can lean on us. Like literally there was not one person, actually, except my sister. My sister, to this day, she's got my back. I remember going to the doctors 2 or 3 times because I was like, I still was in denial. I don't know what that was because whilst I was like, well, I'm doing this, but I still don't believe it's happening.
You referenced in the book that it was almost like you were
watching
someone else being pregnant.
Yeah. Which is, I don't know if that was me just wanting so badly for it not to be true.
It's surreal.
And I think something like falling pregnant, it's not like a decision that you have to make, will I marry this person, or will I start a business? Because at any time you can actually change your mind. When you are faced with, you now have, you are pregnant, one, you have there's a time limit that you only have up until a certain time to make a decision. And then once you've passed that time, you can't change your mind. I'm sure there's other pathways you can go down. But so for me, it was the magnitude. It's the biggest decision I've ever had to be faced with in my life. But I honestly just never questioned it.
Well, I guess you make that decision, and unlike relationships, unlike businesses or friends, you will always be the maternal mother of that child.
Yeah.
It's like set in stone.
And it had nothing to do with like views on anything to do with that, because it was literally, I think for me, do I think this is what my life is supposed to be? Am I supposed to become a mum right now? And that it felt true that the answer was yes.
I think the piece on being brave in the face of a difficult decision or a crossroad, you made mention just then that you had no idea how difficult it would be. But that's where the bravery is, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you knew how difficult something was going to be, start a business, it wouldn't be brave.
Yeah.
Because the unknowns are known.
Yeah.
But I just find it really inspiring to go back to that 19-year-old girl who hadn't had a decorated teenage history of achievement under duress or winning things with the history of hard work and dedication and then achievement, but get to that crossroad, which, as you say in the book as well as today, like that was the first sliding door moment, which pivoted the way that you get here.
Yeah.
Made that hard decision.
And I think what's even more beautiful about it is I think when I made that decision, a lot of people probably would have thought that my life would have gone down a worse path. Like I think given where I was leading up until that point, this kind of rebellious child, it appeared like I didn't really have any values, which I think I've always had values. I think they were just masked with the pain that I was going through, what I was going through. I think most people would have thought, the classic, 19-year-old mum, that's just going to be a life of, there's hard, but I think they were thinking it was hardship and it was going to be struggle. And in actual fact, I have fought every day since that day to make sure that is not the case.
So you make that decision to keep the baby. And where do we go from there?
So then I finally have the courage to ring Dad, who was like so strict. I was terrified. I was like, for sure he's going to come up here and I don't know how this is going to go, but like terrified to tell Dad because I had made that, by that time I'd made the decision this was happening irrespective of what George's father wants to do. And then I remember calling, I fell pregnant, I think around the beginning of December, and I think it was around New Year's Eve, and I called and Mum answered the phone and I was like, I've got something to tell you. And she literally said back in the phone, you're pregnant. And I just put the phone down and I was like, what? Like, I don't know, maybe that's every mother's like worst nightmare, or maybe it was hers for me because of who I was. I don't know how she knew that. I have no idea. And then I literally remember just not like taking a phone call, and then a few days later Dad called and the first thing he said to me was, come home, we'll support you. And that was it. Like as awful as the things that have happened to me with Dad and everything I've gone through, like I have a lot of respect for that phone call because that just gave me safety. It gave me a bit of security. By this stage, I was trying really hard to work things out with George's dad, who still lives on the Gold Coast. And I knew it wasn't working with him. And so knowing that I had a fallback, like I would have a safety net to catch me. And I ended up leaving at 7 months pregnant. Wasn't an easy relationship to get out of. He was older than me and obviously didn't want me to leave. And I remember saying, I'm going home for a holiday. I left all my belongings on the Gold Coast, left my car, left everything, and pretended I was going home for a weekend and never returned. Yeah. Yeah.
And then motherhood came.
Yeah. Like the actual birth. The birth was like probably one of the most beautiful moments of my life. I was so young, and I guess maybe I was so young I had no idea about the fear. I had no fear around giving birth, whereas that was different when I had my son. I was a little older and, I was like, plus I'd been through it, and as beautiful as it was, it's still quite painful. But I had a water birth with her. I don't know why. I just felt like I wanted to get in a bath. It wasn't some beautiful, like today, like 24 years later, everyone plans their,
Pre-plans,
yeah,
yep.
everything's planned. And I don't know, you got mixtapes going on and you got 15 support staff. Like it just wasn't like that 24 years ago. But I ended up getting in a warm bath with her and I had no pain relief through the whole thing, not a Panadol, nothing. And for such a young person, like I think back about this now and I'm like, that's kind of cool that you could go through that whole thing literally using your breath. And I didn't know, I didn't have a breath coach. There was no Wim Hof like YouTube videos 24 years ago. But I really kind of leaned into myself and I had my sister as my birthing partner in the bath. And I remember the nurses saying, you know, you're going to have to get out. Like you can't actually, because I'm assuming there's consent and you normally plan to have a water birth. And this was and I was like, I'm not getting out. Just let me be. And I videoed the whole thing, which is beautiful. Like every now and then I watch it and I'm like, wow, I think it just symbolises so much for me because it was such a big turning point in my life. But the whole thing was just like quite meditative. Like I was asleep in between contractions and it's so beautiful to watch. Like I'm like, wow, like I see my strength in that video. Like it's bizarre. And anyway, this little human came out, which that's also wild. If you have a water birth, they can stay underwater for like a few minutes and it's amazing to watch. So like birth, you've got kids, so I asked about the Lego, but you'd get this. Like birth is extraordinary. Like it's, if you get a chance, you know, for others who haven't been through it to ever be a birthing partner, I think it's a miracle. Like it's life's true miracle to see that moment. So that was beautiful. And then it just got hard. Like it got hard when, you know, the reality of being a mum kicks in and I went back to work when she was 6 weeks old full-time as a real estate agent. And it was just challenging. I think that, but I can appreciate now that would be so challenging for any single mum to try and juggle full-time work, putting your child at daycare at 6:30 till 6:30, plus you're still trying to breastfeed and get into a whole rhythm, no sleep. I think I'd had a touch of probably postnatal depression, which again was not talked about 24 years ago. But when there's days where you're having moments where you're thinking of ending your life, that's probably a signal that like you've got something going on. So that was really tough, and that went on for years. It was really not just being a mum, but just life.
Did you have support from the family?
I did, but this is the other thing. So I moved out when she was 3 months old because I was so determined. Like I made this choice and like this is one of my, it could be a strength, it maybe is a weakness, or it's maybe not a weakness, but I'm so stubborn. Like I mean, someone pointed out to me just recently, like self-made as the title of the book actually came the night before lockdown in Melbourne. When I thought I was going to lose it all. And I called up the tattoo parlour and I was like, I need you to quickly see me. And that's because to me what self-made means is even if you're going to lose it all, you will rebuild. And so that comes back to that moment where I was like, no, I must do this on my own. Even though there's easier options, or I could have stayed at home and I could have got mum, you know, to help, or I'm like, this is my decision and I need to do this by myself. And someone recently said to me, you know, have you ever realised that you don't have to do it all on your own? And I was like, yeah, I don't know. And literally that was like a week ago. So I'm like, I'm processing that. Like I've lived a life where I don't rely on others because I've just been so fiercely independent from such a young age. I think because I had to survive at a young age.
You're hardwired to do that.
Yeah.
And not let yourself be exposed to be that vulnerable to need someone else or anyone else to help.
And I wonder if sometimes is that why life is maybe a little bit harder than others, because I don't rely on others to come, like no one's coming to save me. I believe no one's coming to save anyone.
Anyone, right? Yeah, 100%.
But I'm just fiercely driven by doing stuff on my own. And I think that like, especially being in a relationship, and I'm in a new relationship, that's probably really challenging for a partner. Like it's probably really challenging. And if I'm completely honest with you, it was my partner that said that. Like you just don't have to do it on your own. And I'm like, but I've just always done that. So that was one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, I've got to work on this if it feels true to me. And I'm curious about that.
Sure.
So I guess I'm
But I think it's a good realization for anyone to have that no one's coming to save you.
Yeah.
You've got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think it's looking at my mum. I mean, I think my mum is so brave, you know, leaving Dad when she also had no access to finances because that was all controlled. But I look at that and I'm like, she was 59 when she finally was brave enough to leave and risked potentially ending up homeless. Now, I'm sure my grandparents would have taken her in, but she didn't know how that was going to go for her, and she took the risk anyway. So I guess there's a part of me where I'm like, yes, you can lean on others so long as you've always got your own back first, because we just don't know how life rolls.
Yeah, and I think also from birth to death, you go through all these iterations of life and friends, as I said, and work, and even kids grow up, they leave home. The one common denominator to the whole thing is you, right?
Yeah.
And this is where the self-love piece comes in, because the only constant relationship you have in the entire life is one with yourself. And it's a double-edged sword, I think, because like you know all the failures that you are.
Yeah.
You know what all your weaknesses are. You know all the failed promises that you've made to yourself. And that's where I think a lot of people are the worst critic, are the ones that speak most poorly to themselves in the mirror in the dark times, right? Because probably true. If you had a friend who failed you as many times as you failed yourself, you probably wouldn't be, you know, I'll go to the gym every day, and then you don't.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what sort of friend are you?
Yeah.
So there's probably but they can't, I think part of that bit of knowing that you've only got yourself to rely on, there needs to be that element of understanding and gentleness and softness to yourself to accept your flaws.
Yeah.
And your lot.
How can I ask you a question? I know that in podcasts normally I don't ask the questions, but I'm fascinated by you, and I actually love nothing more than connecting with other humans. How do you find, this is more a time thing, I think the difference is, I mean, a business does take a lot of your time, but it's probably easier to juggle a family around that. When you're going, I imagine your training for what you do is intense and would require a lot of personal time. How do you manage that with having a family?
Yeah, when I was doing it, I mean, I did it as a profession, but it, like any business that you have control over your energy, it's always at a cost.
Yeah.
And you can't. The biggest thing that I want to instill in my boys is that they can achieve anything they want in the world. They have to want it. The desire's got to be there, but anything is possible, because whatever's been achieved has been achieved by a human, right? And we're all human. Yeah. And so, and I'll support them in whatever venture they want to do in whatever capacity. But there is, I guess, two goalposts. One is being at home all of the time. Like, I left law in 2016 because I started an online business because I wanted to be at home. I didn't want to miss out on bringing them up. And the goalposts are, you always be with your children. So you're never without you. And you tell them, you can do anything you want in the world.
But you're not doing it.
But I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And then the alternative is you're some venture capitalist who's never home, and they now see you as the president of some massive company, and you're the absolute example of you can achieve anything you want. Or, you know, you're the whatever. Yeah. Highest of your high in your field. And they're 18, they've got no relationship with you, but you can say to them, you can go and achieve something else, anything you want, because I've been able to show you that I can. Yeah. At the full expense of that relationship.
Sounds very Steve Jobs.
Sure.
Yeah. I think I saw a documentary with his daughter, and it feels like he was never there for her. Yeah. But he did achieve absolute greatness. Yeah.
And so, and I guess, and it's interesting on that, the Steve Jobs example is that you then got to think at what, and he obviously, without obviously speaking for him, but it's about where you place the value of impacting your children's life
versus the rest of
the world. 100%.
And that was probably a bad example, because that's like, he has literally changed the lives of everyone for the better, I would say.
But presumably the people that are in that high end that are neglecting, let's say, inverted commas, neglecting their physical time with their kids or at the expense of their relationship with their children, they're impacting others. It's not just a self-fulfilling
Yeah.
occupation, whether it's shareholders or whether it's, whoever, class, your children, anyway. But so they're the goalposts. And so for me, it was always a constant battle to work out where is the best place to be between those two goalposts, to be there, but also to show them. And you asked about balance and how do I manage both, but I probably would have been better had I spent less time thinking about making sure that I was getting the balance right.
Yeah.
But I think I did a pretty good job. I feel like I'm very close with my kids, and it's probably it has to be at the expense of something, though.
Yeah.
You can't be, like a very close friend of mine who does sport recreationally. We were talking about, well, if you went to do it, let's say you said a half marathon, you can go, well, I won the race, right? But at what expense? And then you should have a category for people who have, a full-time job, who have a great relationship with their children, who look after the community, and then let's see who wins that category, right?
Yeah.
because
It's
you've
not
only
equal
got
playing fields.
Exactly,
Yeah.
they're not equal playing
Yeah.
fields, and just because you didn't win the race, that doesn't mean you've lost.
Yeah.
It just means you've decided to put your energy in other things at the same time.
I mean, balance is funny. Balance is a question I get asked all the time. How do you manage, the mum balance thing? And what's interesting is actually this is the thing about a book that I don't particularly love, is it's already outdated the second it comes out. Like if you're a human like me that thrives on growth, it already needs revising. But I was going through a season of comfort, I will say. Like whilst writing the book wasn't comfortable, I'd come off the back of some pretty amazing years with COVID in e-commerce. So financially, it was a comfortable season of my life, which I actually think is a really scary place to stay for too long, because in my case, it meant that, I was living this life where I was all about, let's walk along the beach every morning, and I'm at the gym at lunchtime, and I wasn't having to necessarily
Grind.
And I was writing the book and that was hard, but I was still living this comfortable life. So, of course, my mindset at that time was you can have it all. So I kind of write, like I wish I could rewrite that chapter now, but I write in the book that how important it is to balance. And balance is kind of important, but not all the time. And I don't think it has to be 50-50. And I wish I could have better articulated my beliefs on balance now and how realistic it is and all the things that come with it. Because what I realised is the minute that I took a year basically out of the business and that took a dive, the balance was out the window. So, I remember writing the last chapter in Byron Bay and I was like, and I can smell the sunscreen from the surfers. And that was all true and it felt amazing at the time. But, kid me not, the second that the business suffered, the balance was gone, because now I realised it's time to get back to reality. And it's not to say that you don't have any time out or balance in your life, but I think it's all relative to, I guess, what you're striving for. At the moment, my son's doing year 12. It's his final year of school, and this year was meant to be all about him. My daughter's already finished uni. She's about to start her career. She's kind of, the parenting involvement day-to-day is kind of finished in some ways with her. It's not like in the sense of it needing to be 24/7. Whereas with my son, I'm like, right, this is it. Like it's grand final time. I've got to be there for him. And life has a funny way that, I now have this huge opportunity with work where I'm now taking on a global role, which means that every second week now I'm flying internationally. And so it's just him and I in Melbourne. And so I've gone from grand final year, I'm here for you, this is your year, that was the master plan, that's what I've been working for, to, hey, mate, we need to sit down and have a conversation. This is what's happening, this is the opportunity, because it's an amazing opportunity. This is how it could reshape my life, which in effect will reshape your life. I don't necessarily, I don't want to not be there for you, but I also appreciate that this is your grand final. And I hope that the work that we've put in up until this point, you've got this, because I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to be there every night. I'm not. And he was like, Mum, you've just got to do this. This is your moonshot. If anyone can do it, you can do it. And I've got me. And I'm like, I have to have trust and faith as well
That's amazing.
that he's got it. But mum guilt has kicked in for the first time ever now, because I'm like, now I'm not there for him. But now I have been there. So now he's saying, go, like fly to the moon, and he's got me. And that's, so the answer is there's never really balance. I don't think so, if you're striving for something.
And it will ebb and flow,
Yeah.
right? Like to go, you would hope that over the period of time of parenting or the period of time of your life, on average, there's been balance.
Yeah.
But that if you zoom in, like any sort of, growth curve, if you zoom in, there's going to be peaks and troughs of savage work, and then there's going to be peaks of, and there's going to be times where you're walking on the beach.
Yeah. And if I'm honest with myself, the opportunity that's there now, I think I've deferred it for 5 years. It was there 5 years ago.
Right.
But my son was 12.
Yeah.
And I was like, it just wouldn't have worked. Would I leave a 12-year-old at home, 10 to 15 days a month? Absolutely not. But I'm like, it's not the ideal time now, but I think the opportunity, that the gap is closing and I have to go. And so here I am.
And that strength from your son is it's such a representation, obviously, of the work you've put in for 17 years.
Yeah.
For him to go, we're good. I'm good. This is fine. I've got this strength.
Yeah.
Rewind we talked about the business, about it, let's say generally, but in your 20s, single mum, all the childcare, but you're getting into financial debt.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard. It's funny because I don't think it would impact me. Well, it's actually not impacting me the same today as it did back then. But I think that's because I've had 2 decades of experience that, when you have a newborn baby and you don't have any money in the bank and you're stealing formula and nappies because you're literally in survival mode. And I'm not stealing because I want to steal. It's because I'm like 19, 20 and I have a limited income capacity at that time. I was uneducated, really. Back then, people really did care if you've gone to uni. They don't really now. So I did, it may not be completely true, but to some degree, I had limited kind of earning capacity, which meant that I was living alone. So my rent, my car, all the things, food, that kind of consumed majority of what I was earning. And then so things like nappies that are really expensive. And again, like we didn't live in a day back then where there was reusable nappies and all like that. They just didn't exist. The world's changed so much in 2 decades. And so it was, she needs food. I don't have money, whatever it takes. That was the start of it. And then it was, of course, all the extra things, the clothing. Babies grow. Like every second month you need to buy a new wardrobe. It's like, so if you really sit down and do the economics on raising a child, like this is the other thing I think probably now parents probably do this. Like I'm sure there's like well-informed people in their late 20s who sit down with their partner and have a really conscious conversation about how much do we think we have to...
Put together a business plan.
Yeah, like how much should we be saving before it's not anything I've ever experienced, but I'm sure that's a very normal conversation now in most households. So I just did not have any savings. I had no money behind me. So, of course, you start with one credit card, then you get another credit card to pay off the credit card, and before I know it, I think by the age of 26, I was $100,000 in debt, which... Again, it doesn't scare me today because like I have a totally different relationship with money and wealth and all the things. But back then that was scary because, I'd get to the point where I'm like, well, I'm not going to be able to put her in childcare because if I can't pay the bill, they won't take her. If she's not in childcare, I can't go to my job and then I'm back on Centrelink. And this is just a really vicious cycle that I'm sure is still very similar today. I'm sure the cost of childcare is relative to what it was back then. It's just a really unusual scenario for particularly single parents. Yeah. So it was never, I wasn't really doing anything crazy. I'd stopped my party lifestyle by about the age of 21. Like it was literally just a living beyond your means scenario. Now, admittedly, a lot of that was from like CityLink tolls and they start at $3, they go to $100 fines, they then go to $300 warrants, and before you know it, you've got like $70,000 just in CityLink fines. I could have probably chosen other roads. Now, okay, I didn't. And I also didn't realise they were going to turn into warrants and catch up with me 9 years later. The problem was so severe though at the time. I think what I was most scared about is because I didn't have money I had a lot of love. So I gave my daughter, she always had a house. We moved a lot. Like I share in the book, we moved 13 times in her first 10 years because I was always being evicted or I'd have to try and you pay your month bond and I wouldn't have any money. So I'd jump before so I could try and just keep moving from one side of Melbourne to the other. There wasn't a lot of stability. There was not a lot of money, but there was a lot of love, which I'm so thankful. Like if my daughter was, it's hard for people to read or know my story and meet my daughter because it just is not what you would ever expect. She's an incredible human she actually bought a house when she was 20.
Wow.
A little one better, because for her, the one thing that she's already identified is stability is key for her because we just didn't have it. But yeah, it was really scary times. I was in the magistrate's court when I was 29, faced with prison time because I couldn't pay my debts. And that, I think, was another moment in life where I'm like, okay, I hadn't really dealt with it because the issue felt so big at the time and I didn't have a means to pay it, so I kind of ignored it for way too long. I address that in the book. Like if you're going through any financial hardship right now, do not avoid it. Like absolutely ask for help from wherever you can. And then luckily I got let off. I didn't get let off the fine, but I got let off with a payment plan. And that day, that forced me to say, well, you know what, you may not have the money, you may not have a plan, but what you do need to do is get more money. So I started approaching jobs that on paper, like I had that self-limiting belief that I haven't finished, like I was still very much in the victim mindset. Young mum, haven't finished school, poor me, why is this happening to me? I was like, well, no, that does not have to be the choice. Start applying for jobs that give you the money to pay this payment plan. And that's when I landed a job as a general manager for one of the biggest retail companies in Australia. And the guy that I replaced was just going through his MBA and I hadn't even done VCE. So it just is, when people also ask me, well, how did you get out of that situation? I found another way. Like there's always a way.
How did you land a GM role?
Just hustled. Like I definitely hustled. So I was working for the Breast Cancer Foundation, again, not for profit. Like I care a lot about philanthropic things, but you don't get paid well. So a little bit of right time, right place.
Yeah.
They donated my desk to that company. So I was working in there as like for a charity in the office. So I got to know people. I knew this guy was unhappy because we shared desks. And I was like, he's going to jump. I'm going to go for the job. And I had to fight though. I remember I went for the job and, you know, the person that I actually got the job from had been there for like 30 years. And I really had to fight for that job. And I remember when they offered me the job, I knew how much the guy was being paid because he'd shared it with me. And they offered me less. And I was like, no, I'm not taking that. Wow. Like, I know I'm not educated, but you want the same outcomes. So I went back and I fought and I said, I'll take the job, but you will pay me this. And they agreed. And then I paid off, by the age of 34, I then paid off the debt. So that is like a short version of like 14 years of financial hardship. But I think the biggest lesson in that is that had I not have been forced to go to the magistrate's court and really think I was going to do prison time, it probably wouldn't have forced me to
change your life around.
Yeah, like to think differently and to take ownership, basically. Like I was in denial again. Like I was in avoidance. It's too hard. It's like the problem's getting bigger. I don't know where to start with this, so I'm just going to do nothing. And that forced me to do something.
So then you're an employee. You've cleared the debt. When does the feeling of being an entrepreneur, creating your own business, where does that start?
It actually started when I was pregnant with my son when I was 24. So like I've always had that drive in me from a young age. I used to love selling things and I don't know, it's the classic entrepreneurial. Most entrepreneurs started young. And so when I was 24, I was like, right, this is one of those moments in life where I'm going to have some time because I'm about to have a baby. And again, coming back, I don't sit still. So I was like, I love kids and I love acting. And I'd obviously put my dream on hold to have my daughter. And I was like, I wonder if I could like merge the two. And so I set up a business called Shows for Kids. And I literally created, like I choreographed the whole thing. I was the main actor. I was the booking agent. I built that up over 4 years. And in the fourth year, I think I spent 250 days on the road touring schools, teaching kids about healthy eating and exercise, anti-bullying and all the things. But I got burnout. That was the first time in my life that I got so burnt out that I was like, oh, I just can't do this. My son had a nanny. She was travelling with us. My daughter was like in grade 3, I think at this time. She was missing school. And I just walked away. And then it was from that point that I realised I needed to learn about business. So I started like learning along the way. So I guess I always knew from that moment that I would come back to it once I knew what I was doing. And I think that's important. I think if people have goals, you do need to spend time being paid to train. So or sometimes you need to do it for free if you can. But it's probably better before you start something to get someone else to pay you to learn how to do it.
Particularly if they've gone down the beaten path as well, and they've had that experience to learn from them.
Yeah, it's amazing. So then I knew it was time, and then I, in 2015, again, like one of those moments where I didn't just leave. There was a lot of like corporate bullying. I was in a general manager role. It was quite competitive. There's not that many female executive roles. There weren't back then. There's still not. So it was a very competitive landscape, and there was a couple of girls in that organisation that I think we were all gunning for growth. And I'm sure it was not personal, but it wasn't a nice environment to be in. And I just was like, this is just not on. And I reported it. And then, you're a lawyer, you know how this goes. So I end up in a room with the legal team, and I get presented with a piece of paper, which I talk about a little bit in the book. I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to, but it's been like 10 years now. I never really say who the retailer is, but I'm sure people can work it out. But I got presented with an offer, and essentially the offer, there's a term for it. I can't remember what it's called, but basically it's like, just keep quiet and leave, and here's a check, and you have a choice. And I remember, because this is where my values as a human were like, but that's not going to fix the problem. These people are going to keep doing what they're going to do. But then I got offered with what I felt was a fair deal to,
For you to escape that.
Yeah, because it was either going to be, I think I was probably going to pursue the bullying pathway. That's how it ended up in there. And it's interesting because the lady who I was doing that with, she had a much more, like, her role was linked very closely to revenue. So from a corporate thing, it was definitely going to cost them more to lose her.
Sure.
So I get all of that. It's business. At the time, it didn't feel like business. It felt like this is my life and this is wrong and ethically this shouldn't be happening. But I kind of looked at it and I thought, well, I'm unhappy anyway. So I either take the deal or I have to think about how
Fight.
So I took the money, and then the biggest blessing from that was I went on a trip with my family to kind of work out what I was going to do next, and I ended up starting the business with the money. So that's the silver lining. I don't think it should be a silver lining for bullying. I talk in the book actually about, how other women can kind of deal with, there's a lot of talk about equality in the workplace, and there needs to be more like, men versus women, but it's actually women versus women a lot of the time. And I don't think that gets talked about near enough. It's like women just need to be nicer to women. We all need to help each other get there. So,
like a rising tide lifts all boats,
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's actually not just a male, female. It's let's all just help each other. Yeah.
Be better human.
Yeah. So that's how I ended up starting the business.
So silk pillowcases.
Yes.
Why that?
I'd slept on them for years, so I had one since my mid-20s. They're amazing for your skin and hair. Anyone that's experienced it will know that. And the first night I was in New York, mine got taken off with the laundry. So I went back to sleep on cotton for 5 weeks, and it sounds very bougie and like, if you haven't slept on silk, you'll be like, well, what's the big deal? I'd remembered all the reasons that I loved silk. So I came home. I was actually going to do a technology product, and I wasn't super passionate about that, but I thought it had, it was interesting. I'd seen it in Vegas. And then I was at the same time researching to replace this pillowcase because I wanted a hidden zip, because I was like, well, they're $100. I just want a zip so it doesn't fall off my pillow. And I used to hide it behind my other ones because they never sat nicely. And just one didn't exist. And it was like that classic light bulb moment.
Sure.
But it's not like a super, like there was no real strategic thought put into it. I was like, I need to buy one. I want a zip. There isn't one. This is interesting.
There was no silk pillowcases with a zip?
No, worldwide in 2015. Yeah. And then I was like, or maybe if I want one, I'm sure this problem exists for everyone because, if I need it, others do. So 3 days later, I went to China to explore everything.
3 days later? Whoa.
And then 3 months later, launched in America and Australia. And that was 9 years ago.
That's incredible.
Another hard door. It's
right.
It's the same year that I just cleared my debt. So I think that's a really important thing. It's like I've just come off 14 years of
But to be fair, it's almost like the weight, the shackles of that debt was off you.
Whereas I think a lot of people, like I was earning, I share this openly, $210,000 as back then plus bonuses. And I think for a 34-year-old woman that hadn't, I wasn't educated, that was quite a good salary. And people back then particularly used to say, you're crazy. Like, why would you take the risk? You've just come off the back of like, you're finally getting ahead. You're earning more than your husband. Not that that should matter, but at the time with my husband, I'm like, because it's just not lighting me up. Like, I don't know. It comes back to growth. Like, if I'm not growing, like in my mind, it's like, it's the opposite of, like, you kind of feel like you're going backwards in life. So I was like, I need a challenge, and that's what I did.
For those who don't know the story, so you create the company, and then it takes a couple of years,
to get traction. Yeah.
Any doubts in that period of time?
Probably not, because one of the most famous stories with the brand is I had no marketing budget, so I got paid $53,000 that day. The deal behind the closed doors, I got $53,000, and I genuinely thought that was enough money to start a product business for at least a year. So I was like, I'll give myself a runway. If it doesn't work, well, anyone that does have a product business will know that your product costs are going to consume most of that, and then you really don't have a marketing budget. So I had this amazing product, and I was like, and now what? No one knows about it. Like, and that's going to cost, it does cost a lot of money. That's the hardest part of building a business, is the brand awareness. So I was like, well, I don't have a long time. I need to work out a way to get this product out there. So 3 months after launching the brand, I bought a ticket to America. And like, this is weird telling a lawyer this, but the more famous you are, the easier it is to find business records on people. So I wanted to get them in the hands of the Kardashians. So I was like, I'll just find their business address, and I found all their business records, and I was like, oh, there's a registered office for Carr Jenner Communications. Cool. I'll fly to America and I'll drop them off to this address. Also, to anyone who wants to know how I did that, that's how you do it. You look up business addresses, right? And you hope that it's an actual business. In this case, it wasn't. I didn't realise that. Now, again, maybe it's quite common for people to have different registered addresses for their business, but I thought I was going to an office. So I was like, it seems legit, seems fine, nothing wrong with this. And I bought a ticket and flew over there.
So at this stage, just to get some clarity here, you're like, all right, the marketing plan here for the business that you've
just started
and you've got out of debt and you've left your high-paying job to fund, or to go for, no marketing budget, and the play is
to get the world's
the Kardashian, the world's most famous person or people. I've Googled their business address. Yeah, pretty sure it's got to be good.
I had 3 different actual
addresses.
Well, no, 3 different websites that
sources saying that.
So I was like, that's probably
pretty
the
confident.
Address. Yeah,
let's fly to America. And the idea would be you would have some pillow cases, some products. Yeah. To give them.
Just turn up here and just be like,
say, hey,
hi,
I've heard of you. Yeah. Can you use a pillow? Okay.
So I also knew that they'd slept on silk their whole life because their grandma swears by silk. And I'd seen photos on the internet, they looked homemade, because you have to remember back in 2015, it wasn't a huge market. So I genuinely also thought I was being of service. I was like, this product is amazing. It's definitely better than anything out there. I'm kind of doing them a favour. Like, my mind honestly thought that. I was like, I genuinely think they'll love it. At worst, they'll use it. They may not share it, but they'll definitely use it.
At worst, you don't find them. That didn't come across your mind?
No, it didn't come into my mind at all. Because I was like, 3 sources. That's obviously this is happening.
Power of the internet.
Buy my ticket, and I arrive at 6 a.m. and then get in a hire car. And then I had a 4-page handwritten letter, which I think this comes back to me and my personality, is it was important that they knew who I was, what my story was. I had photos of my kids in there. I told the whole story, like a very condensed version of my life, and that I had a really big purpose behind this brand, that the brand's always existed to give back since day one, and that's a whole other story. But I shared with them that my mission was to do good, and if they ever chose to support me, I would pay it back by paying it forward. And that was really the ask. I acknowledged that I had no money to pay them, and I think that was a really important part of the story, because I knew what I was asking. It was an exchange. It was an exchange for something that they could have.
It was a pay it forward exchange.
Yeah, but they could have done a commercial arrangement, which now happens, which didn't happen really a lot back then. But anyway, I turn up to this address, and I soon realise it's not a business address. It's a residential address, and it's Kris Jenner's home address in a guarded, locked up estate. But as I pull up to this thing with all the security, and you can imagine what these places would look like, I was like, well, I'm here now. I've come this far. So I go up to the gate and I hand my license over, and, he's like, have you got an appointment? And I said, yeah, I'm here to see Carr Jenner Communications, which, to be fair, I was there to see them.
Yeah, as your lawyer,
Yes.
you certainly weren't misrepresenting
No, they
the fact
weren't
that you were
expecting
there.
me, but
No,
I was
I
there.
was
The
there
question was
for-
asked, are you here? And I said, yes, I am here to see you. So, like, yes, I was. Anyway, once they opened the gate, I'm like, okay, I think at this point I'm like,
The guards opened the gate.
he's opened the gate. He gives me my license back and lets
Off
me
you
go
go.
through. I was dressed in a suit and I guess I look,
The part.
I don't know. But he did. He let me through. But at that point, I think my stomach's like, I'm not meant to be here. Like this. I'm definitely not. Like, but we knew I wasn't meant to be here. But I was there. And then I pull up to the house and I'm like, whoa. Like, I'm not a car person. But the first thing I see is these insane Rolls Royce, one like complete custom, like matte black, matte grey. And I'm like, this is not what I was expecting. Like, it was very overwhelming. But they were renovating, so it had a big do not cross on the driveway. So I'm like, well, here's another sign. Like, you're not a kid. Like, get out of here. Like, what are you doing? And by this stage, I'm idling out the front in this car, which felt like I was there forever, and it really wasn't. The cameras, I'm like, it was a lot. And I'm like, it's that moment where I'm like, oh, my God, what do I do? Do I leave? Do I go? Like, what am I doing? How am I going to do this? Where am I leaving the box? And at that exact moment, a UPS truck turns up to their residence. And I do believe in, like, life, there's a little bit of, like, luck. You can manifest things. And I'm like, well, the universe has my back because he's coming to their address at this exact moment.
To drop something off.
And he just walks over the thing. So I'm like, well, this is it. This is my moment. So I walk over. As I'm approaching the door, he presses the doorbell and I hear noises inside. And I'm like, oh, again, should I stay? Like, do I just, hi? Like, but I think I knew I wasn't meant to be there. So staying felt inappropriate. So I put my box down on top of theirs and I left. I get back in the car once I've left the estate and I Google those cars and I'm like, it was Kanye West and Kim. They were living at her house, which we find out 6 months later on the show because they were renovating. So I'm like, I've just delivered them not only to Chris, but essentially to the world's at the time most probably famous
Couple.
Yeah, on the planet. So it was just one of those moments where, I don't know, all the stars aligned. And then I hear nothing. You know, I get back, that was in January, I really hear nothing. And then in April, 4 months has gone by and, like, you don't forget the moment, but it's not something that I'm thinking about every day.
Sure. You're assuming
So
you
I
weren't here.
Yeah, and I get an email this one day from this guy, Michael, from Kim Kardashian's team. And I remember thinking, oh, this is just spam. So I literally gave quite a cold response. They were essentially, he was asking me to, Kim would really like to put all of your pillowcases in her New York apartment. She'd like the monogram, blah, blah. And I was like, firstly, as if someone from Kim's team, I was like working from home at this point. My mind was like, smells like spam. So I kind of give a bit of a cold reply. And then I get on LinkedIn and I look the person up and I was like, oh my God, it was literally Kim's executive assistant. So I'm then going back and like, oh, like, I'm so sorry. Like, you know, I like just wasn't sure. And that was the beginning of the message that came through was that she loved the product, but they sleep on king pillowcases. And of course I'd delivered like, in Australia, we all sleep on like standard, right?
I didn't even realise the pillowcases came in sizes.
So she couldn't use them. So I hadn't heard or seen anything because she physically couldn't use them.
Right.
So she'd asked for king. So that was the first time we started making king pillowcases. She wanted the monogram with all of their initials.
Sure.
So that was the kickoff. We were the first ever to do monogram silk pillowcases. And then from that moment, she started sharing them. And then she was doing giveaways on her apps and on her website and just genuinely became a fan of the brand. And 9 years later, I still have a direct connection with Chris and Chloe. Chloe sends voice messages on my Instagram. And I still think it's because of that letter. I'll never know, but I still think it's because of that letter. And then the irony was on Halloween 2018, I actually got invited by Michael, the assistant, to actually go to Kim's house to deliver our PJs. And I was like, well, now I do actually have an appointment to be here. So, yeah. So it was just...
Me again?
Yeah.
But I legitimately...
But I think the point there is, like, to your point as well, was that my plan? Like, yes, it was, because it felt like the most obvious thing to do in a time where, like...
But there seems to be a commonality here of how amazing your intuition is, because that sounds like exactly the same force of nature.
Yeah. But also just go for it.
But that's the same pull of decision making that sounds to me when you were 19 to say, I'm going to have this baby.
Yeah.
Right? To go, you know, I know 1,000 people would tell me not to do this, not to go to America, and on 3 sources of the internet telling me to go to this address as the marketing plan.
And like I say, like I I'm getting closer to being able to share what we're working on at work at the moment, but it's a similar thing. Literally 2 months ago, I decided to put my house on the line, my property, which I've never done, especially with like, you know, after going through what I went through in my 20s, I was like, I finally have a property. I'm never going to risk my own security again. Yeah. And I was like, no, like I believe in what we're doing. So
you have a whole chapter in risk in there.
Yeah, so I've just put my house on the line to back what we're doing this year, which is why I'm on a plane every second week. And it's like, but I everyone else around me is like, why would you do that? Like, you're finally at a point where, one, you finally have a house. Like, can't you just hold on to it for fun? I'm like, no, I fully fundamentally believe. And
wow,
we don't know where things are going to go, but I'm always
like
prepared.
It's going to the moon.
Yeah, I'm always prepared to give it a shot. So I think that's the lesson. Just be brave. Be so brave. And like, if you lose it all, what is losing it all anyway?
That's right.
Like, that's the self-made. Like, it's what really are you losing?
You're not losing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. You could lose yourself by not being brave.
100%. This has been amazing.
Cool chat.
Well, I'm really excited, and now I'm personally invested in seeing
where it goes. Yeah. And
yeah.
what are you working on right now? I think I saw. Did you get injured? You were going. I was like, what is sub 20? And then I was like, is sub 20 like you want to get something in under? I was like, sub 20 is 20 hours.
Yeah.
I was like, that is nuts.
yeah.
I'm like sub 2 for a half marathon. Like,
it's all relative.
Sub 20.
It's all relative. No, I think at the moment I'm taking, and this is boring, so this bit won't be a part of the app, but that took a lot.
Yeah.
I prepared for my life around breaking 20 hours.
You should not delete this.
and it didn't pay off. It didn't come off last year. And it was, I guess, to your point, one of those things where you're like, yep, this is going, like, we're doing this and this is going to happen. And everything in the world pointed towards that we would. And then I got sick on the race. And then an athlete, a really, really good athlete from New Zealand, he did it in the same event. So he broke it. And to his credit, because it was his first attempt at that sort of distance. And yeah, and then that put me in a hole for 3 months, not knowing what to do, because I hadn't gone back to law. And but because of that has resulted in finding the law again and opening up this place and having this amazing team and this studio and this opportunity, which if the race went well, I definitely wouldn't be here and I definitely wouldn't have found this path. And sport has such a short runway, and I was coming to the end of that. I was probably at best 2 or 3 years out from physically going back on the decline. So these opportunities that have presented themselves in business and in life generally wouldn't have been presented had I kept in the sport.
Yeah.
So you almost look at, that Steve Jobs quote of, you only can connect the dots looking backwards. And when you're in that trauma, you're in that really challenging part of life, it's hard to go, oh, this will all work out for a reason and it'll be good. But certainly for me, looking back, going, man, I'm so grateful that I did get sick, because where I'm now, and I even got a message from a friend today going, like congratulations on the law firm and everything, like you bounce well, and it's sort of, yeah, it's hard to connect the dots when you're there, but
please don't delete this.
No,
and the
fine.
reason I say that is because, like, I call that moment being in the mud. Like, when you're like, other people call it rock bottom, whatever it is. But I'm like, so often, and a lot of people relate to what you just said. Like, and I don't think we talk about the pivot moments. I don't want to call it a failure. It's a pivot moment that, like, no one knows how life goes. Like, we're not in control. Like, there's that quote, like, man plans, God laughs. And I'm not religious, but I'm like, it is kind of true. Like, you had a plan, everything should have gone to the plan, and God laughed. Right? But like, that's just how it is. And I think what we don't talk about enough is that sometimes it's in the breakdown that the breakthroughs happen. And I know certainly in my life, it's like all those rock bottom moments, those moments where I'm like in the quicksand where it's dark. It wasn't the plan. It was just not how it was meant to happen. They have truly been those quantum leap moments in life. So, like, I'm grateful for them. At the time, like you, I'm not grateful. I become more grateful now because I'm like, here we go. Something's happening. So I have faith now that, like, I don't know, like July 28th last year was my darkest day I was 41 at the time. In 41, that was the darkest day I'd ever had in my life. And on the day, it's the day where I went down to the basement, and then I think there was another level that there's like the under basement that I'd never been to. And it's because I'd come off, like, my plan hadn't gone to plan that particular year, and the book and the whole thing, I just had a big breakdown. And on that day, whilst for the first day in my life, I was like literally trying to get in the shower, just trying to drag myself physically. Like, it was like my body just wasn't able to move. It sounds like depression. Maybe it was for a moment. And I'm like, I had to get to that dark, dark, dark place, which to be fair, I don't want to visit again. But had I not have gone there that day, it scared the hell out of me. Like, it scared the hell out of me that there was this under basement that I didn't even know existed, because I think as a human, when you realise there's spaces within your soul that you didn't know existed until you go there. And I was like, well, okay, I've seen it. We're not coming back here. The only way to not go back there is to start going up. And from that day, I was like, right, I'm okay to go back to the basement, and then I'll get back to the ground, and then but I had to see it to realise, just like, I don't know, it's like when you're down, just look up. But it's like, that doesn't help people. Like, what does that even mean? It's like, for you, when you were in that space, the only way to come out of it, the only way to build, like, I'm sitting here, your place is amazing, right? Like, what you've built here is incredible. You were coming up, and like you say, that wouldn't have happened had you not have ended up in your basement, right? And you don't know where this is going to lead. You don't know why you're doing this, but it will all make sense. And like you say, you're starting to join the dots now. But I'm like, that's why I'm like, don't delete this, because, like, people learn the most about when people talk about the how you got out of it and what it all meant, which I think we all just gloss over. It's like, oh yeah, I went from this to this. It's like, no, but, like, you didn't. Like, you were down and out. And what did you do? You could have chose to stay there, which a lot of people sadly do. That's like true mental health, and, you know, and there's other elements to that. You didn't. Look where you've come since that moment. It's pretty remarkable.
Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah.
Now Cody will have to choose as to whether he cuts it or keeps it, I guess.
I'll be disappointed because like, to be honest, it's like, these are the real, this is what life is. These are the real moments in life. People learn most by realness. And you know what? If you sat here and said, oh my God, I want it, like, people would be like, cool, that's amazing. But to be fair, what do they learn from that? What they learned from what happened when you didn't is actually more important.
I was in there for 3 months, and I didn't know what was going to fill my cup up, but I could identify what was draining it.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what direction I was going. But I was like, okay, I know that this isn't helping, so I removed that. I know that wasn't helping, so I removed that. And that gave me a little bit of space to understand where I wanted to go. And then Did
you get a psychologist during any of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then had one before as well.
Yeah.
And it's so challenging when you are in the mud, as you say, because you're seeing the world in a lens that isn't the true lens, but seeing it in your shifted lens, which is like, well, yeah, I mean, you can tell me ways around dealing with this difficult moment, but it's still the lens, it's still the world that I'm seeing. And it's such a trip, because you can only see it through the lens that you've got it on, and which is not great.
Yeah, and when you're in the mud, you can't see much because it's muddy. It's not clear.
Yeah, and so, and the idea that, and I sort of relied upon the idea that, you know, there are cloudy days, but I had seen the sun before. And the sun's above the clouds, and it's just like this understanding that it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
You'll see the sun again. It's just trying to figure out how. And then I think a pivotal moment was I had a really deep conversation with my auntie, my mother's sister. Generally speaking, I didn't need, and I had a lot of loving support through that period of time from my inner circle. But she was the first person that was sort of I wouldn't say firmly.
Tough love.
A little bit.
It's important.
To say, but it wasn't hurry up, like just get on with life. It was like it came back to my boys and my kids, and it's like for their future, you need to do something good now. Like it's almost like put on that responsibility.
See, I say that's her trying to pull you out of the mud.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that was all I needed.
Yeah.
I was like, right, it's no longer about me and me trying to get myself out to achieve or do something. It's for them, and that helped them tremendously. So I was like, okay, what's going to be the next 10, 15 years, 20 years for their future? And this is what's the end of that.
And I love that. There's a psychologist she's blown up on TikTok. Her name's Julie. Can't remember her last name, but if you type in Dr. Julie, she does these incredible, it all started very organically, these incredible little kind of 30-second clips on TikTok. She's from the UK about tips every day. She does them every day. They're brilliant. And she talks about like if that glass in front of us, it's full of mud, you were in the mud, it's dark, very dark and heavy and all the things. And you kind of said something where you started removing the things that weren't filling you up. She talks about pouring things in that do fill you up. So like if that cup that we're looking at is full of mud and we start putting in a glass of water, eventually it dilutes. But you have to find those things. What is the water or the light, which I call the light? What are the things that bring you the light? Okay, we need to put a little bit of that in every single day. And before you know it, you can start to see clearer. It just depends how big the glass is that you're in. But having anyone listening to this, because I think every listener can relate with one thing that my psychologist says to me, the only certainty in life is uncertainty. So, and that's scary, but that's the truth. And it's like just knowing that everything we've ever gone through in life, we've actually gotten through.
Yeah.
Like if you're
here now.
Some of these things really suck. And when I hear them in the mud, I'm like, ugh. They sound like these quotes on Pinterest or whatever, but they're so true.
Yeah.
We've all gotten through everything in life up until this point, so you actually will get through it. It's just for me, I've got to a point where I'm like, I'd like to get through it a little easier next time, or a bit more educated, or knowing and understanding myself. What is the light?
Yep.
How can I kind of clear this as quick as possible? And I think that's where therapy's been amazing for me.
Yeah, I think it's challenging when you're in that muddy place. Yeah, you can definitely say, and this is where I struggled to fill up my cup, because it was such a challenging place that anything small I wouldn't bother because it was so insignificant to the depth of the mud that I was in.
Yeah.
So I was like, why would I bother doing that? Because it's not going to help this whole big situation. But it really does.
Yeah.
And that's that you just stack those little wins.
Yeah. And commit to it. Yeah. And not try and get out of it. I think a lot of people, it's like the debt. That was 14 years of mud, right? Eventually it got a little clearer, but it's like I was on, there's a podcast called the Little Fish Podcast. It's 3 guys in Melbourne. They were the first person to ever ask me, why did I not just give up? Essentially, why did I not just literally? I was like, whoa, that was a brave question. But I think for me, it's because, yes, it was muddy, but I think every single day I was doing something tiny to move forward. I was finding that little bit of lightness every day. And yes, it took 14 years, and that's a really long time, but I got there. And over a period of, you start to, it's like the gym. I go to the gym and it's like it took 139 days to get to 10 pull-ups. It's like you don't see it day one, but I have faith that if you just come in every day, use a resistance band, you'll start to see tiny bits. It's the same when you're in the mud, just like small progress every day. But if you do nothing, you will stay there and it will suck you into the vortex.
The most profound part that I find in your life is with your 19-year-old saying, I'll have the baby. Because that's built your resilience to tackle the debt.
Well, there can't be anything harder, really.
Sure.
Writing a book, to be fair, got close. I don't know. I think it's because it's not the book. It's that the book brought everything to the surface.
Yeah, sure.
That's why I say it's hard. So to anyone who wants to write a book, don't be scared. But if you really want to write a book, for me, I think you have to start from a place of allowing everything to come to the surface. And then slowly, that's what I mean. My basement's full of stuff now because it's like I've welcomed it. And it's like slowly I have to go down there now and deal with it. So.
Before I let you go, 5 questions that we always ask a guest. Number one tip for someone looking to be more successful in their life?
The number one tip that comes to mind is asking yourself, I guess, if the reason you're doing what you're doing, it comes back to your alignment piece. Are you doing it because you want others to think you're successful, or are you doing it because you want yourself to be successful? That was a big one for me. Like, ego is a big piece of success. And in the early days, I think I was doing it for validation from others. So therefore, I never felt successful. So I think to be more successful, you have to ask yourself what it is that you really want, and maybe you'll reach success way sooner, because actually it's no longer about money. It could be something that you actually may already have. So that's kind of what feels true to me.
Number one tip for someone looking to be happier in their life?
Daily pleasure moments. Yep.
Finding those small.
Yep, like a juicy peach. I don't know. That sounds really good. Like, honestly, like last Saturday I was in the sun and I did a thing on my Instagram and I'm like, this is pleasure.
A juicy
like,
peach.
Just like, we miss all these moments.
Yeah, sure.
Like, sit in the sun. It's summer. Get the juiciest peach and like, but just like have pleasure with it. It sounds really silly, but I was like, I was in
the moment.
Like, that felt so, because we're just so busy in life and it's like you miss the moments. I think that we're all missing moments of happiness because we're constantly moving. Like, stop, slow down, actually taste the peach.
Other than Self-Made, the book, which I'd recommend everyone get, the number one book that you recommend or gift to people?
Probably Stop Playing Safe by Dr. Margie Warrell. She's Australian. I had severe anxiety during COVID and I was scared of everything. And for someone who embraces bravery and embraces risk, my mental health, I got social anxiety and it crippled me for 2.5 years. Couldn't get on a plane for 1,001 days. Stop Playing Safe got me out of that.
Great.
Yeah.
Most influential person in your life?
Two, both my kids. Like, I know that sounds super cliche, but like, I'm now inspired by my daughter. Like, she is, honestly, at this stage in her life, I'm so inspired by her.
That's
for
beautiful.
So many reasons.
That's a beautiful answer.
Yeah.
And then finally, a guest, famous or not, we should have on the show.
I mean, have you had Dinesh on?
No.
Okay. He comes to mind because, like, someone asked me this recently, like, when I need to bring my mind back to like a really solid place and I need to remember gratitude and all the things, he's the type of person that I would think about, because when you hear the story, and I'll wait for you to hear that yourself, I don't know, nothing in life is ever as bad as we think it is. And that just meeting someone like him and having someone like that in your circle really brings, like, it's just so great. Like, it will make you grateful that you can run, put it that way.
Sure. When
When you've got a quadriplegic sitting in front of you, it's probably going to shift your whole perspective on how your journey ended with that race. I don't know, probably will.
They're great answers.
Yeah.
Olivia Carr, thank you so much for
So
coming in.
nice to meet you. I'm just so glad we're connected now.
Yeah, it was a beautiful chat.
Shout out to Judy and Peter for connecting us. Yeah, I'm very grateful.
And yeah, thank you so much for spending the time
Yeah.
in the sun. Not a juicy peach in sight, but
No.
let's look for it on the weekend.
Or Loco Love. Loco Love is a chocolate made in Byron
Byron
Bay.
Bay, yeah.
They are my daily pleasure. They're just more of an expensive daily pleasure. Yeah.
All right.
Thank
you so much.
Have a lovely weekend.
Yeah, cheers, mate. That was another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. Cody's always asked me to have some quip, funny line at the end of this episode. But this episode is a special one. So all I ask is that you leave a review and recommend it to somebody that you think would like it. It means the world. Until next time, peace.